welcome to a continuation of just my sharing my family story. So where I left off, my family had left Hong Kong. We'd returned to the States. We were looking for another ministry to work with. We thought our return to Hong Kong was imminent. It ended up taking 5 years. So that was from when I was from 10 to when I was 15. Reentry was tough for me. A number of factors. I was used to our church or our spiritual community being my social circle. And we returned to a very small church where there were maybe 10 other kids total. Closest in age either direction was, a year older, a year younger. And then I was still being homeschooled, so then my other sort of social network was our neighborhood. I did my best. I did my best to fit in. There had been some changes. I experienced for the first time in my life the expectation to be cool. I didn't know what this cool thing was, but I was used to being liked. I was used to having friends, and then suddenly there's like this extra requirement. It was tough. I have to say it was tough. And I think the combination of the two resulted in a few things. I was a 10-year-old Sunday school dropout. So, I just, Sunday school just wasn't doing it for me. I felt like I could teach everything that was being taught. I mean, I'd been hearing it since I was old enough to go to Sunday school and on some level before. And so I started sitting in and listening to the sermons, which on the other hand were a little bit above my head and above my level. But I think also what I cared about most in life was shifting. So at this point in my neighborhood, the kind of cool thing was to be a bully. Not like physically beating people up, but like, there was a lot of gossip and making stuff up about each other. Treasure saying hi. And and so pretty quickly, just for the sake of wanting to fit in, I, joined this group of bullies. I can't tell you exactly how long that lasted before, I took things too far for them and they turned on me. In the middle of this, we switched churches. And when I say in the middle of this, so that was from, I would say I was 10 years old when we came back. Everything kind of felt like it exploded in my life by the time I was 11. So the year I turned 12, we switched to a bigger church, a 300-person church with a full youth group. And I mean, there was some good things there. There was some harder things. It really was a mix. So, the wonderful thing was getting into a youth group. I was around other kids my age. Now, the other kids my age weren't necessarily committed to God. But they were friends who weren't into, like, bad things. At that time, I think I was really open for just anyone to accept me that seemed cool. And I had a couple of youth leaders that met that criteria. There was 2 different couples that taught my Sunday school in 2 different years, of course. And there was also a couple of a pair of college roommates who were helping out with the youth that really had an impact on me, especially. And the two of them would share about, like, one was a new believer, covered in tattoos, had been in the drug scene before. And another, was a second generation Christian. And I distinctly remember one time him sharing about all the reasons why he put off being committed to God, and the reasons why putting off being committed to God was a bad thing. I remember crying during his sharing. And then, there was this other guy whom, I would consider my spiritual father, even though we have been out of touch since I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, where I looked at him and I looked at his passion for God. And at the same time, like, he talked to me like I wasn't a kid, which was very important to me at the time. And so I had a stirring inside of me where at this point I had left God in my heart for about 2 years, and there was this stirring inside me of wanting to get right with God, but like afraid of what it would cost me. So at this point in my life, there were other impacts too. There was a group, Master's Commission, they're called, out of Phoenix, Arizona, held by, at the time at least, perhaps still now, led by this lovely man, Lloyd Ziegler, who, he would come and he would preach, and I could just feel God while he was talking. And, he would call people out in the crowd. In the middle of a sermon, it wasn't even like, okay, I'm going to stop and show off I have a prophetic gift. I'm not even sure that he considered why he did prophesying. But at one point, like, he pointed me out in the middle of the sermon and basically spoke into what I really cared about at the time. There was stirrings. There was so many stirrings that culminated for me in, so our youth pastor's brother came to visit, and he preached, and he offended me. At that time in my life, dating was the most important thing to me. I was a 12-year-old kid, and I was completely boy crazy. And, I thought that the social acceptance that I was missing would be fulfilled that way. And I had kind of dated a guy, but not really, we spent a month saying we were together, and only seeing each other at church, kind of thing. And then that had ended because he was older, and he found someone who actually knew how to communicate with him and was like ready to have a relationship. So anyway, this traveling guy came in, and he was like, talking about, why it was important to have a focus on God, why we were, too young to really be experimenting in relationships, and, how we needed to be careful in terms of our choices, even in terms of who we would marry. And I remember being very angry at him. And a sassy 12-year-old that I went up to him and I challenged him. And I basically was like, well, if we're not allowed to date, how are we supposed to find love? And what he spoke over me in return, was definitely from the heart of God. It was a lot about what my ministry has been for the last couple of decades, but especially the last 10 years. And as he spoke, I heard God speak to me, and the challenge was, God basically said, Stephanie, what you're looking for, you're not going to find anywhere else but me. And there was this call to surrender everything that I accepted. And some of you have read this story. I've blogged about it a little, on my spiritual birthday. It was April 8th, 1992, a couple weeks before my 13th birthday. And I count it as, so I had made my initial commitment to Christ when I was 5. And I definitely, and got baptized then, and it definitely counted from a child's perspective. But this day was the day that my faith really became my own, and my walk with God over the next 3 years before we moved back to Hong Kong. During those 3 years was what gave me the strength to get through just the challenges of transitioning to Hong Kong. So I hope you enjoyed my story. It feels like this is getting long, so I will continue it in the next one.